Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started by welcoming everyone. Welcome to Watang Yu. Welcome to everyone joining online as well. This is the fourth day of our 5-day course, and we're going to start with meditation, and then I'm going to move into this talk about sharing the path to enlightenment, how to guide children along the path. This is a topic that is helpful if you have children, if you're going to have children, or even if you're not going to have children, but you're just interested in sharing the path with people around you, like your friends or family or people like that. So while it's really geared towards sharing with children, you'll see that you can actually use some of the things that I teach you in order to share these teachings with other people around you as well. So if you'd like to join for meditation, I'm going to do the chanting, and then I'm just going to let you guys be on your own for the meditation, where I'm not going to provide you any guidance. You just focus on the breath. And then when the mind moves off the breath, you cut that off and let it go. And then remember, there's the loving kindness meditation where you're doing these affirmations in the mind. We've been doing that each morning where you, in your mind, you meditate on, may I be peaceful. May I be safe. May I be well. May I be free of all discontentedness and the suffering it causes. Then you go a little bit wider, right? Maybe you do mom and dad or brothers and sisters or people like that. Go a little bit wider. Maybe do some friends or neighbors or coworkers, having some people in there that maybe you do have anger and hatred towards, that you have dislike, or your mind gets annoyed or frustrated when you're around that person, because your mind needs to let go of that anger and hostility towards that person. Then you're going to go back to the breathing mindfulness meditation, and then we're going to come out with the chanting. So you're going to be doing this on your own, which is what you would be doing at home if you're doing this on your own as well. So I'm just going to do the chanting on the way in and the chanting on the way out. But in the middle, you do the breathing mindfulness meditation, loving kindness meditation, back to breathing mindfulness, and then we'll come out with the chanting. Okay. Arahang Samma Sambuddho Mahakawa Bhutang Mahakavanang Apivateyami Savakato Mahakavata Tammo Dhammang Namasami Supatipano Mahakavato Sāvaka Saṅkho Sanghang Namami Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa Iti piso Mahakawa Arahang Samma Sambuddho Vicacaranang Sammuno Sakato Rokavitu Anutero Purisa Dhamma Sati Satatava Manusarang Bhutto Bhagavati. อะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธมหาเกวาโพตังมหาเกวันหังอภิวาเทมิสวากขาโตมหาเกวตาธัมโมธัมมังนามัสสามิสุปฏิปันโนมหาเขวโตสาวกสังโฆสังฆังนามามินะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะนะโมตัสสะภะคะวะโตอะระหะโตสัมมาสัมพุทธัสสะอิติปิโสมหะเขวาอะระหังสัมมาสัมพุทโธวิชาจารนังสัมมุโนสกขาโตโรกาวิตูอนุเตโรปุริสาดามาสติสัตตาตาวามนุสนังพุทโธภาควาติ Okay, if you guys would like to slowly make your way out of meditation. Once again, welcome to all of you guys. Nice to see everyone here. Welcome to everyone online who's joining as well. What I'm going to do is share with you this topic about sharing the path to enlightenment with children. And remember, you can use this with other people too. It's really geared towards children, but it's helpful if you're sharing this with your friends or family or people like this in your life. You'll be able to share the path to enlightenment, but there's certain things you're going to need to keep in mind as you do so. During the lifetime of the Buddha, people were able to get to enlightenment as early as age 7. If you can imagine getting to the point where you no longer experience any anger, sadness, frustration, irritation, annoyance, guilt, shame, fear, stress, anxiety, loneliness, boredom, shyness, resentment, jealousy, none of that from the age of 7. Your mind's focused, concentrated, you have clarity of mind, deep memory, all your personal and professional relationships. Well, at 7 years old, you don't really have too many professional relationships, but eventually you will. Everything would be completely harmonious. You wouldn't even have a bad mood from the age of 7. So it's possible for children to actually get to enlightenment, but they need to know the teachings and they need to be able to be brought up learning the teachings. Because as a child, they actually have a lot less pollution in their mind. As we age, we take on a lot more conditioning and our mind becomes a lot more polluted. There's never a bad time to start learning and practicing the teachings of the Buddha, but the earlier in life that you do that, the better, because you have less pollution to be able to work through. So for a child to actually get on the path to enlightenment and start learning and growing and developing, they'll actually experience a lot more progress, a lot more quickly, and they can actually experience enlightenment very early in life if that's what they choose to do. But it means that they're going to need to have adults around them that are able to guide them and help them to be able to understand the teachings. So by an adult understanding the teachings, whether it's a parent, like a mom or dad or grandma or grandpa, or whether it's an aunt or uncle or whatever it is, you can actually help children to be able to experience an amazing life. it would be a very different life than what we grew up with, right? We grew up without these kinds of experiences. We had stress, we had anxiety, we had fear, we had guilt and shame and all these other feelings, sadness and anger. Think about your first boyfriend or girlfriend that you had and you guys broke up, or, maybe if you had a pet and your pet passed away, or things like this. There was a lot of difficult times as we grow up as a human being, but that can actually all be transcended and improved by learning and practicing these teachings. So as an individual chooses to share the teachings with a young child, one of the things to keep in mind is this is like a child is a growing plant. You are the plant enthusiast who's interested in growing this plant. And the teachings of the Buddha is like the guide stake that's going to help you to be able to guide this plant, to be able to grow and develop and nurture this plant. The individual, the child, is the one that's going to need to do the work, but the adult is able to then help them with this guide stake, right? With these teachings, you're able to guide them. So the first thing that you need to be able to do in order to be able to guide a child is you need to be able to acquire wisdom yourself. You're not going to be able to guide somebody on the path to enlightenment if you don't understand the path to enlightenment yourself. So you've seen this a few times now as I've been talking. The very first thing in each one of these talks is acquiring wisdom, because that's what is the real priority on the path to enlightenment. And I never know who's going to be in one talk versus another. So I need to start off each talk with helping you to understand that your number one goal in this path to enlightenment is to acquire wisdom through learning, examining, investigating the teachings, reflecting on them to independently verify them and practice them. The more wisdom that you have about these teachings, the better you'll be at guiding an individual on the path to enlightenment, whether it's a child, whether it's your life partner, whether it's your parents, or any other person that you might be interested in helping on the path. You're going to need the wisdom. Oftentimes when people are first starting to learn teachings like this and they see how true they are, they want to run out and go tell everybody about them right away. Well, I encourage you to slow down and really take some time to be able to learn and practice and develop yourself, because the more wisdom that you have, the more effective you're going to be at being able to help somebody. So there's no need to go out there and start to share the teachings with people right at the beginning. Learn the teachings yourself first. Practice them really closely. See how true they are and how they actually work, so that you can look someone in the eye and you can know with 100% confidence that what you're sharing with them is the truth. Whereas if you're not quite sure about what it is that you're sharing, you'll kind of waver and you'll kind of waffle, and the person will sense that. But when you know the truth with 100% certainty and you can look someone in the eyes and you can explain the truth, you'll be able to be real confident, and that person will be able to learn from you. So I encourage you to first acquire wisdom. That's very important. Remember that as you're guiding a child, they are their own individual being. Essentially, a child is going along life like this, and the parent or whoever it is that is the adult, we're just right alongside of them, like a parallel process, giving them guidance along the way, but they're making all their own decisions in life. Of course, in certain situations, when you have a really young child, right, if they're getting ready to cross the street and there's a truck that's going to come and slam into them, you're going to grab them and pull them back, right? Because that's what you need to be able to do. But as they age, it's important to remember that they are their own being. They're making their own decisions. And that's part of the process of cultivating wisdom. If you try to make all the decisions for them, they'll never be able to cultivate the needed wisdom that is important for them to grow and develop on the path to enlightenment. So even though we might think of it as my child or my son or my daughter, it's really not mine. It doesn't belong to me. It's its own individual being, right? It's not mine. It's not really my child. So they don't belong to me. Start early. The earlier you start, the better. The way that I think about this is that training can start inside the womb, right? When my wife was pregnant with our son, she was meditating already, right? So that's really helpful for the child. And even when the child's inside the womb, it's learning, right? Oftentimes we think that when the child's inside the womb, you can't see it. It's behind all that skin and all the other organs. We think that maybe it can't absorb things, but it's absorbing things. When my son was inside my wife's womb, I used to play mandolin. It's a musical instrument. And when he came out, he recognized it. He knew what it was. He could hear what was going on. So when she was pregnant, my wife and I weren't practicing the teaching super close, but we were understanding the teachings to a certain degree. So if we were going to argue or something like this, we didn't do that. For that 9 months where she was pregnant, we just really were diligent to make sure that we weren't yelling and hollering and screaming or, upset with each other. We just really kept things really nice and calm and peaceful, because he was absorbing all of that when he's inside the womb. If we would have been yelling and hollering and arguing, he would have been absorbing that. So he never got any of that when he was inside the womb. So remember, training starts early. The wife or the mother, the female, she could actually be meditating, keeping her mind nice and calm. And if she's around the father during that period of time, it'd be really wise for the father to understand that he's teaching this child even when it's inside the womb. So starting early. There's even things once the baby comes out in its infancy, and if it's a toddler, that you can actually be doing to train your child. There's things like what we used to do is when our son was playing and you could see that he's about to get discontent, because if you've been around children, you know what happens, that they'll be playing with their toys and maybe something will break and they get that face first where it's like, and then it's, right? Then they start crying, right? So when you see that face and you know discontentedness is arising, you can actually redirect their mind in order to help them cut it off and let it go, because they don't understand the 4 foundations of mindfulness. They don't understand right mindfulness, to be aware of their mind, and they don't understand right effort, that they need to cut off and eliminate unwholesome qualities and cultivate wholesome qualities. But as an adult, if you understand that, and that's an important part of training your mind to no longer have discontentedness, when you see them having discontentedness arising, you can redirect their mind. One of the ways you do this is when they're starting to become discontent and you see those facial expressions, you can say something like, "Did you see that cloud out there? That is a beautiful cloud. Let's go look at that cloud." And you can take their hand and walk over there. Or you can be like, "Wow, there's a bird out there. Do you see that bird? That's a beautiful bird." And you just completely redirect their mind, and their mind just kind of changes, and they don't actually become discontent. They don't actually start crying at all. So you can help them to cut off and let go, even when they're in their infancy, even when they're in their toddler stage. They don't even talk yet. You can do these kinds of things. And this is going to help them later in life when they actually start doing the formal training. I started formally training my son when he was age 6, but by that time he had had 6 years of cutting off his discontentedness, cutting off his discontentedness, cutting off his discontentedness. And he hardly ever cried. He was hardly ever upset. But even in that early stage when he was 6 years old, he had some discontentedness, but he got rid of it pretty quickly. It didn't take much effort for him to be able to train his mind, because for those early years of his life, we were helping him cut off his discontentedness. So you can start early when they're in their womb, when they come out, and then even as early as formally teaching them at the age of 6. Then if you create a culture within your family unit of acquiring wisdom, this is very helpful, because that's ultimately what's going to lead to them making wise decisions, is the cultivation of wisdom. The more wisdom that they have, the better. So creating a culture of cultivation of wisdom, so that when you're having conversations and things like this, that you build that into the conversation, is the building of wisdom. I'll give you an example of this. There were times where I'd be driving my son to school and he'd be in the passenger seat and he'd ask me a question, and we'd be talking and having conversation, and I'd be helping him with certain things that he would ask, not necessarily about the teachings of the Buddha, but just about anything in general. Like, why is the sky blue? Why are clouds white? These kinds of things, right? And I would answer him to the point that I understood these things. But sometimes he would ask me questions I don't know. And I would say, "You know what, son? I don't know the answer to that. But you know who does?" He's like, "Who?" I said, "Google. How about if you pick up the phone and Google it?" He was like, "Really? How do I do that?" So he picked up my phone. Not only was he learning whatever topic he was interested in, but he was learning how to search and use search engines. So he started Googling, right? And then he found out the information and he was like, "Wow, now I understand," right? So he was cultivating wisdom. So now he knows if there's ever a time where he doesn't know anything, he knows how to find the information. So you would like to create a culture of cultivation of wisdom within your family, because this is ultimately what's going to lead them to improve decision making in their day-to-day life, is the cultivation of wisdom. And not just about the teachings of the Buddha, but many things, because they're so curious about the world around them and why things happen the way that they do. So you can help them with that. Answer the questions that you know, but be comfortable to say, I don't know, right? If you don't have ego, you'll be comfortable to say, I don't know. But let's find the answer to that. And my son also sees me doing that from time to time. I'll come up with a question in my mind and I'll kind of talk it out loud. And I'm like, you know what? I don't know the answer to that. Let me find the answer. And then he sees me doing the same thing. And then he will tend to follow and do that same thing. So having this culture of cultivation of wisdom is really helpful. Remember that you're a role model in your children's life, but even if you're an employer or you have brothers and sisters and you guys get together for holidays, your neighbors, people like this, however you function in the world, the people around you are watching that and they're going to learn from that. Even if it's your life partner or other people like this, they're going to observe how it is that you function in the world. So being a role model means that you don't put yourself up above people and you put a chip on your shoulder and you're wearing some kind of merit badge to show that you're a role model, but just understand that people are learning from what you choose to do in your day-to-day life. You're teaching people all the time by the way you interact, and whether it's a child, a life partner, employees, neighbors, they're watching you. And if you function through these teachings, they're going to learn these teachings. If you have craving, if you have hostility and bitterness and harshness, if you're aggressive, if you say things in degrading and disparaging ways about others like gossip and slander, they're hearing all of that stuff and they're going to model that conduct, particularly children, but even other people around you too. You can see the things that you do, the people around you do those same kinds of things as well. So the more that you clean up your practice, the people around you will start practicing better and better as well. It's important to have respect towards your life partner, your parents, grandparents, siblings, elders, and anybody in the community. Because of the individual, each of us are essentially role models, that as you have respect for these people, the children will be respectful as well. That if you're polite, kind, friendly, respectful to your parents, you're teaching your children how to treat you. Whereas if you are disrespectful to your parents, your children are going to be disrespectful to you. That's your karma. That's the results of your decisions. If you're disgruntled and angry and bitter and harsh and disrespectful to your parents and your grandparents, elders in the community, your children are going to learn that from you. And they're going to treat you exactly the same way that you treat other people. That's the natural law of karma, of cause and effect. So even though you disagree with your parents, even though you don't agree with all the decisions that they make, maybe they've done some really unwise things in your life, it's important to not be disrespectful and unkind and impolite when you're around people and when you're around your children, because they're going to pick that up and they're going to absorb that, and then they're going to treat you the exact same way. Get comfortable with allowing the struggle. We talked about this yesterday, that children are going to struggle because they lack wisdom. There's going to be certain struggles that they have in their day-to-day life. But in that process, they're cultivating wisdom. If you're attached to your child or you're attached to your life partner or siblings or something like this, when you see that they're having difficulties in their day-to-day life, you're going to want to jump in and fix it for them because you don't feel comfortable when they're struggling. You're getting painful feelings because they're struggling, and your mind doesn't like that. And the mind thinks the way to solve it is to jump in there and fix it for them. But if you do that, you're not allowing that person to cultivate any wisdom. So that means that in the future, when they encounter that same exact issue, they don't know how to solve it because it's their decisions that are leading to that particular issue. And if they never cultivate the wisdom of how to make different decisions, they will keep experiencing that same problem over and over and over again. And if you're not there because you are impermanent in their life, you're going to not be there sometime when they encounter that particular challenge. They don't know how to solve it because they never cultivated the wisdom because you jumped in and solved it for them. So you're going to need to learn how to not be attached to them so that you can step back and allow them to experience the struggle, and then they'll cultivate the wisdom. But you're nearby. If they have questions or they need guidance, You help them with that guidance. You help them to cultivate the wisdom, but they do the work to overcome that challenge. I gave you guys this example yesterday with my son, where we talked about how he was playing with kids in the village, and me and my wife shared with him that we thought it was unwise for him to play with these certain kids because we knew they were into unwholesome things. But he was like, no, those are my buddies. I want to hang out with them. Okay, up to you. Do whatever you like to do. Well, a few weeks later, he came home and they had stole his helmet. They had stole his bicycle helmet, right? And then a few weeks after that, they had dumped some water on him and hit him over the head with a bucket and all these other things. And it wasn't during Sangran time where it's normal to be dumping water on people. So eventually he figured out that it was unwise for him to spend time with these particular children, and he started spending time with other children. But it was his decisions that led to that. And now I see that he can make really wise decisions about who to spend time with and who are wholesome friends and who would be unwise for him to spend time with. He's able to make those decisions himself. In fact, just last night, he was asking me to be able to go to this event where he goes to Thai language school, and they're having an event. And at this Thai language school, there's children, but there's also adults that study there too. And they're having an event where they're going to be serving beer, right? And I said to him, I said, hey, if you're going to this event, what's going on with the beer? How are you going to handle that? He's like, oh, I'm staying as far away from that as possible. If there's anybody drinking alcohol, I'm going to be as far, far away as possible. I was like, oh, okay, good, right? So he has this wisdom. He understands, right? So he would have never cultivated the wisdom of who to spend time with and who to not spend time with if he hadn't gone through this struggle. So going through a struggle, it can cause you painful feelings if you're attached to the person, but you can restrain your mind and pull that back, allow them to struggle, cultivate the wisdom. That's the most loving thing you can do for them, because now when they meet with that same challenge, they can solve it. They can handle it. They can make wise decisions for themselves, because you can't be with your child all the time. He's going to this event at the school. He'll be there for 5 hours by himself. I'm not going to be there. I'm going to be somewhere else. And he's going to need to be able to make wise decisions on his own. And he has that wisdom to be able to do that. So you would like to get comfortable with the struggle and allowing it to occur. It's important to help a child eliminate attachment to their parents, because children will be attached to their parents. They're going to grow up with an attachment to you, and you're going to have an attachment to them, but you can eliminate this attachment and overcome it. So there's some things that we oftentimes do, we think it's normal, but it actually builds attachment. So for example, if a child's at home and mom or dad's at work and we come home, we might be so excited, like, yay, mommy and daddy's home. Oh, this is so great. Yay. And we get so excited, right? And we might even do that as a parent, kind of incentivizing that excitement, right? But then when you go away, they're missing you. They feel sad. They feel lonely. They feel bored, right? So if you allow that mind to get up into that excited state based on the condition that mom and dad are home, when you're away on a business trip or something like this, they're going to be very sad. They're going to be very lonely, right? That's what's going on in their own mind. So you would like to not allow those kinds of things to occur. When you come home, don't make some big spectacle of it. You yourself might be actually trying to get the pleasant feelings through your children being excited. You need to be able to understand that this is all part of the problem. You need to just be able to walk in calmly. Hey, little guy, how are you? Give him a hug, give him a kiss, whatever you're going to do, but not having to have all that excitement, right? So now you can just greet them like normal, right? You don't need to be so excited. So then when you're gone, they're okay with that too. So my wife, as you guys heard, she oftentimes leaves for 2 months at a time. She usually does this twice a year, where she'll leave for 2 months to America and come back. And then she'll be here for a few months, and then she'll leave for 2 months and come back. So when she leaves, it's not like all this crying and boo-hooing and, oh, mommy, please don't leave. And when she comes back, it's not like, yay, mommy's home, yay, the world's better now because mommy's home. No, it's just like, oh, mom's leaving. Okay, see you later. Have a good time. Hug, hug, kiss, kiss, whatever is going to happen. And then when she comes back, oh, hey, mommy's back. All right, great. Hug, hug, kiss, kiss. But there's not all this excitement. So children can oftentimes be attached to their parents, and you would like to be able to do things where you see that they're attached to help them get rid of that attachment. I'll give you another example. One time, me and my son, we used to play basketball quite a bit. We have a basketball court inside our village. And when we first started playing basketball, we would always go to this basketball court and play together because he was pretty young. He was only 8 or 9 years old when we started playing basketball. So he was interested in going with dad, and I was taking him there to show him how to play and all these kinds of stuff. Well, there became a time where he would speak up and he would say, "Hey, Dad, will you go play basketball with me? I would like to go play basketball." And I would say, "No, son, I'm going to stay home. I have some things I need to do." He was like, "All right, well, I'm not going to go then. I'm going to stay home." Right? So I could see that he was attached. He was interested to go play basketball, but only when dad would come. When dad wouldn't come, he wasn't interested in going. This shows that you have an attachment, because otherwise he would have went. Right? So now I see that he's got this attachment. So now the next time he asked me to go, he said, "Hey, Dad, will you go play basketball with me?" I said, "Sure, I'll play basketball with you, but how about you go by yourself first, and then I'm going to finish up what I'm doing here, and then I will join you." Right? Because this gets him out of the house and headed towards the basketball court without dad. So then he's like, "All right, sure." So he would go and play basketball, and then about 10 minutes later, I would come and join him. Right? But now he had that little bit of time where he was doing it by himself, and he kind of broke through that wall to be able to go play basketball by himself. So then the next time, he said, "Hey, Dad, will you come play basketball with me?" I said, "I'm going to stay at home. Would you like to go play by yourself?" And he's like, "Sure, I'll go play by myself." I was like, "All right, have fun, son. I'm going to be here at home. I'll see you when you get back." And then he was willing to go by himself, right? So you're going to need to be able to spot when they're attached to you, and then look for ways to be able to step back and help them to break through that wall to be able to go do things on their own, that they don't always have to be with you when they're actually doing certain things. And you'll see that they're attached to you in certain situations, and they're only willing to do something if you're with them. And now you would like to help them to feel more and more comfortable to do things on their own. Because when they're dependent on you, that means there's an attachment there. You would like to get to the point where they're free, and you can spot these kinds of things, and then create these kind of environments where their mind is choosing to go by themselves and go do something. I wasn't forcing him or controlling him, but creating an environment where his mind was able to do that if he chose. You're going to need patience, because there's gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress to be able to get to enlightenment. That's the way you're going to need to be able to experience enlightenment. And a child's the same way. Gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress. There's going to be things that you need to repeat over and over and over and over and over and over again. I can't even tell you how many times we've talked about lying with my son, and he still lies. He's 13 years old. He lies about some of the most silly little tiny things, right? It's craving, desire, attachment that produces lying, right? And they're going to lie. They're going to do things. They're going to steal, right? My son actually stole one time from my wife, stole some money. And one time he stole from one of his friends, right? But we needed to be able to solve this and teach him and use it as a learning opportunity. We didn't yell at him. We didn't holler at him. We just talked with him. We had discussions with him, helped him to be able to see how unwise this was and that it was causing harm. But you're going to need to have the patience to be able to sit down and talk with them and understand that they're not going to learn it the first time. They're not going to just hear what you have to say and immediately start doing that particular thing. You can see here that I teach you guys right speech, but you can't go out there and do it right away. It's not possible. You're going to need gradual training, gradual practice, and gradual progress to implement it in your life slowly. So a child is going to need exactly the same thing. So you're going to need to be patient with them, understanding that they're a work in progress and they're going to gradually develop. Be creative and have fun when you're teaching a child, because one of the best ways to teach a child is through fun games and activities, right? The idea of a 6-year-old child coming in here and sitting for 2.5 hours to learn the Eightfold Path, not possible, right? So you need to be very creative in how you teach. So when I first started teaching my son, I didn't know whether or not he would actually learn from me, because at 6 years old, I hadn't really tried to actively teach him anything yet. It was just playtime, right? Mommy and daddy are always playing. So now I realize, like, boy, I'm going to have to teach this child a lot of things. So I wasn't even sure if he was going to be able to learn from me or if he was willing to learn from me. So I was sitting watching TV, and he happened to be sitting on the floor over there, and the remote control for the TV was next to him. And I just said to him, I said, Bailan, can you hand me the remote control? And he said, okay. And he handed me the remote control. And I was like, okay, because I'd never even asked him to do anything like that before up to that age. And I was like, okay, well, he listened to me. He did what I asked. So then he ended up going into the kitchen and getting a glass of water. And I said, can you bring daddy a glass of water? He said, sure, I'll bring you a glass of water. So I started with these really small things like this, just to see if he would even do what it is that I was asking him. So then once I realized he was willing to do the things that I asked him, I said, hey, would you like to learn about the teachings of the Buddha? And he said, well, what are the teachings of the Buddha going to do for me? And then I explained to him that it's going to help him to eliminate anger and sadness and all these feelings. And he was like, yeah, Daddy, please teach me those teachings. I would like you to teach them to me. So then I said, okay, well, we're going to have fun when we do this. And so I taught him the universal truth of impermanence. That's the first thing I taught him, just like you guys, right? That's the very first thing that you need to learn, is the universal truth of impermanence. So I taught it to him in about 2 minutes, right? But then I said, okay, let's go outside and do a scavenger hunt. Right? If you guys know what a scavenger hunt is, where you go around and you kind of look for certain things. I said, let's go out into the village and see if we can find something that's permanent. So we went around the village and we were looking for things that were permanent. And of course, he couldn't find anything. So after the first 5 minutes, we switched. And I said, hey, let's look for things that are impermanent. So we started walking around the village looking at things. And he was like, oh, Dad, there's one right there. The sidewalk has a crack in the sidewalk. That's impermanence, because the sidewalk isn't solid. At one time it was, but now there's a crack. And I was like, yep, that's impermanence. So then he went around the village a little bit more, and he's like, look, there's the leaves in the tree. Those are green, but the ones on the ground are brown. And I was like, yep, that's impermanence. So we went around for about 30 minutes walking through the village, playing this little fun game to help him to be able to understand the universal truth of impermanence. And each one of the teachings of the Buddha, I figured out a certain game or some fun activity to be able to help him to learn the individual teachings. So it's helpful to be creative and have fun when you're teaching a child. They're going to really enjoy it. They're going to find learning is fun. And then you're going to see that they're going to adopt the teachings into their day-to-day life more readily. It's important that you don't force your child to be able to learn, or even if it's your life partner or your friends or family or anybody around you, that you don't force people to learn, because you know when someone tries to force you to do something, you resist it. That's the first thing you do, is dig your heels in. So you're not interested in forcing them to meditate or forcing them to learn the Four Noble Truths. You would like to ask them and invite them. So I didn't say, Bailan, I'm going to teach you these teachings. You sit down and listen to me. I asked them, I said, hey, would you like to learn the teachings of the Buddha? And that's where he was interested to do that. So you're not interested in ever forcing a child or anybody to be able to learn the teachings. You like to start small and then build from there. The example I just gave you with the remote control and the glass of water and things like that, that's what I did. Is I started very small and built up from there, slowly but surely, to the point where we were able to have longer and longer conversations about the teachings and how to implement them into their life. So you like to start small and build from there. You're going to need to get comfortable with mistakes, because as you're teaching a child, you're going to make mistakes in your teaching, and they're going to make mistakes that they're not going to be able to implement the teachings perfectly. So you're going to need to get comfortable with your own mistakes and their mistakes too, and be willing to take a detour and kind of a left-hand turn or a right-hand turn as you're starting to do something and you realize that it's not working out. You're going to need to be willing to change gears and switch directions. There's something that I refer to as proactive training and then real-time training. What I mean by this is proactive training is like the things where I was talking to my son about the universal truth of impermanence. And then we went out into the village and we kind of looked around for impermanence, teaching him the Four Noble Truths, explaining that to him. This is proactive training, kind of ahead of time. But then there's real time training that when they're actually discontent, you can actually teach them. So what I did is I first taught him things like the universal truth of impermanence and the Four Noble Truths and things like this. But then I created situations where I could give him real-time training. At this time, he used to play Legos a lot. He used to put Legos together, and then he would go off to school and he would leave his Legos in the middle of the living room, all put together. So when he was at school, I would break up his Legos into like 3 or 4 different pieces. And then when he would come home, he would see the Legos. He already learned proactively that the universal truth of impermanence and the Four Noble Truths, but he hadn't put it into practice yet. So when he came home, he saw his Legos were all broken up and he started crying and crying. He was so upset that his Legos were broken. And then I got down on the floor with him and I was like, "What's wrong, Bailan? What's wrong? What's happening?" He's like, my Legos, they're all broken up. He was all crying. And I was like, "Well, why did this occur?" And of course, it was challenging to be able to teach him, but eventually he calmed down and we talked about the universal truth of impermanence. We talked about craving, helping him to be able to see that this discontentedness that he had was him craving permanence and wanting these Legos to be permanent, and that he could let go and understand that this is impermanence and this is normal. And then we talked about it and we discussed it. So he started understanding and he calmed down, right? And he put his Legos back together. Then about 2, 3, 4, 5 days later, he went off to school again and I did it again. I broke up his Legos and he came home and he saw his Legos and he started crying for about maybe 10 seconds, 30 seconds, but then he cut it off himself and he ended up putting his Legos back together. And then I waited a few more days and then he went to school and he came home. I had broke up his Legos. And when he came home the third time, he looked at his Legos and he looked at me. He looked at his Legos. He looked at me. He said, "You broke up my Legos, didn't you?" Because I hadn't told him that I was the one who was doing this. And I said, "Yep, I sure did." He said, "Okay, I'm going to just put it back together." I said, "Okay, sounds good." Right? No crying, no discontentedness, no nothing. So slowly but surely, his discontentedness was eliminated as it relates to his Legos because his craving was slowly eliminating, because that was the real-time training that he got, right? So he got the proactive training to understand the Four Noble Truths, but then I created environments where he could get real-time training in the moment. And this helped his mind to be able to then get rid of his cravings, desires, attachments. So you can do these kinds of things. And I can give you many examples of how I did these kinds of things. And in this situation, when he's usually experiencing it, he's angry. He's upset. There was one time that I did this one thing. It was the only time I ever heard him cuss. He actually called me a name. It was profanity. His face was all red. He was so angry that he was spitting as he was talking, that he couldn't even control his saliva. He was so angry and turning red. And he was really angry. He was really upset with me. But of course, it was his own mind that was causing this. So as he was going through these experiences, he was really upset. But if you ask him now, "Hey, what do you think about your dad helping you to train your mind?" he'll tell you that he's really pleased because he doesn't experience discontentedness hardly ever at all. So when they're in the process of training, they'll be really angry. And if you're attached to them and you want them to be peaceful all the time, you will be upset. You will have difficulties doing what it is that I'm describing. But if you understand that this is part of the process and that they're going to have to walk through the fire in order to get to the fresh air on the other side, then you'll be comfortable doing this. So while it's unfortunate that he experienced these painful feelings, I knew that he had to experience those painful feelings in order to get to the peaceful, the joy. He was going to need to experience these painful feelings because his mind got the pleasant feelings when he was getting attached to the Legos. So to get unattached to the Legos and his mind wasn't getting what he wanted, he was going to have to walk through the painful feelings. There was no other way to do it. It's not possible for you to get to enlightenment without experiencing those painful feelings. So if you're attached to your child or your parent or your sibling, when they're experiencing those painful feelings, you'll find it to be very difficult. But if you're not attached and you understand this is part of the process and what you're guiding them towards is peace and joy, you'll be very comfortable doing this because you'll know it's the most loving, kind, and compassionate thing you could ever do is help somebody to be able to get to enlightenment. So these are the kinds of things that you're going to need to be able to be willing to do when you're trying to help somebody else get to enlightenment. So I'm going to pause here and see if you guys have any questions. There's more for me to share with you, but I'm just going to see if there's any questions on anything I've shared so far. Remember, if you guys could use the mics here, and those of you guys online, you can put it in the Facebook, YouTube, or Zoom in the comment section, or in Zoom, you can raise your hand and unmute your mic. Does anybody have any questions here or online? Mm-hmm.
Yeah. When you broke his Lego, what he built up, didn't he learn somehow that it's okay to break things from others?
It wasn't broken, meaning destroyed. I just took it apart. So you might say that Dad was playing with the Legos and I just left them apart. Right? That's it.
Is it the way he saw it, that you were playing with his Lego?
I'm not sure. You'd have to ask him. But either way, this is the process. I didn't cause any harm. I didn't cause harm to his physical body. I didn't cause harm to his material possessions. And I didn't cause harm to his reputation. This is where you need to be able to understand the natural law of karma very well so that no harm came to me. Right?
I just could imagine that because that it was somehow, I mean, it doesn't belong to him, the Lego, but I think it was for him to play, right? And someone else took it. Doesn't he might learn this too, that, oh, I can take some Lego from another friend just and play with it without asking him?
He understands that Dad was training his mind and this was part of the process. So this resulted in wholesome karma. For me to do the things that I just described to you, there was nothing but wholesome karma because he got to the point where he eliminated his craving.
Okay, thank you. And then another question would be interesting for me, how he cultivated the wisdom that alcohol or substances are unwholesome, because I think he didn't try it himself. So how he cultivated this wisdom himself.
How did I help him to learn that? So, of course, I talked about it and taught him the 5 precepts because it's part of the 5 precepts. But one time he was with me when I was in the city, and there was a very intoxicated man that came up to me and asked me for money because he didn't have any food. And this man was had very dirty clothes on. He was very intoxicated, could barely walk. You could smell the alcohol coming out of him. His hair was all messed up. He had his body was not very hygienic. And this person came up to me and asked me for money. And I said, well, I'm not going to give you money, but I'll go buy you food. And he said, okay. So I took him to a restaurant, and Bailan was with me. We took him to this restaurant. We sat down and we ordered food. And we sat there with him while he ate his food. And I was talking to my son, and I explained to him, I said, see, this is what substances lead to, where this man, he was actually older than me, this man doesn't even have the money to be able to afford to buy food. And I said, is this what you would be interested in doing, having substances like drugs and alcohol so that you can't even afford food and you're not able to take a shower and have clean clothes? And he said, no, that's not what I'm interested in. So we sat there for a while and talked to this gentleman while he was intoxicated, and he was obviously intoxicated. And then there were different times where we would go to the store and there would be alcohol around, and I would offer it to my son. I would say, hey, would you like a beer? Right? He was like 8, 9 years old, 10 years old. He was like, no, Dad, I don't want a beer. I was like, oh, you sure? Come on. Like, you can have a beer. Like, of course, I wasn't going to buy it for him, right? But I was just confronting him with it. And I did this many times. I've probably done it like 20 times, because in this situation, I felt like if he could tell me no, that I'm not interested in that, if he has a friend that offers him alcohol or some drug, he would feel more than comfortable in telling his friends no, that he's not interested because he's used to saying no. So there's time where we'd be in the supermarket and there would be a whole, aisle of wine. And I'm like, oh, wow, look at all that wine. Those bottles look beautiful. Should we buy some wine for the house and drink some wine at home? He's like, no, Dad, I don't want to drink any wine. I was like, okay, that sounds good. And then one time, so we did that many times, probably 20 times in different restaurants and stores and stuff. But then there was one time my wife had a bottle of, it was probably vodka or rum at home because she was using it for part of her traditional medicine. It's not ingested in the body. It's used topically for the traditional medicine that she was doing. So she had this in the house. And I took off the cap and I went around. His cousin was there too, and he's a little bit younger than Bailan. And I said, hey guys, look at this. This is alcohol. And I was like, hey, would you like to smell it? And I went over to them and I held it up to their nose. And they were like, oh, that's horrible. I don't like that smell. That's horrible. Get that away from me. Right? So I was helping them for their mind to be able to learn that this alcohol is not something that you're interested in being around, and it doesn't produce any beneficial results. And I explained to them the reason why it smells so bad is because it's poison, that if you put it into the body, it's going to damage the physical organs. So helping them to understand this. So slowly but surely, over multiple situations, I taught them that substances are unwise, that it's going to lead to unwholesome results in your life. And then he's seen enough people in real life, but he's also seen things on TV where like there's, or not just TV, on YouTube, where people have been drinking and driving and they've either killed themselves or killed other people or they got arrested or things like this. He's seen a lot of that kind of stuff online and in real life. So that's how he's cultivated the wisdom to be able to see the natural law himself. Mm-hmm. Yep. Okay. Did you have a question? I saw you, or was that just in preparation for a potential question?
Yeah. Okay. So I don't know if it's a question as such, but maybe you can give me advice. So I had my son at a young age. I was only 16 having my son. So I definitely didn't have the wisdom during this time. I went through a lot of struggles, which as I was getting older, I sort of realised, oh, this could have affected my son. Like if I'd done this differently, maybe. And then I started sort of like blaming myself a lot, thinking, oh, well, maybe I should have done this. He wouldn't have witnessed this. And then I like overcompensated by like buying him things, taking him places and things like this. He is 19 now, by the way. We've got a good relationship. I haven't really been able to like sit down and fully explain like everything. And he's in the UK at the moment with my mum. He does come out and visit. He stays a few months at a time. He is a good child, very respectful. He is like, he don't drink alcohol. But he is still really dependent on like myself, my mother, for like money. He doesn't work. I don't know. I just like, before I used to like blame myself a lot, thinking, oh, I wish I'd done this differently. I wish I knew this at that point in time. Maybe he would be more confident, because I think he lacks confidence. I think he might have like slight autism, not to the point where but it's just like certain things has to be certain ways. He don't like noisy places. He's quite unsociable. But now I've actually learned to live with myself and like forgive myself for how I was when I was younger, bringing a young child up as well. But for years I blamed myself for like certain things because obviously I didn't have the wisdom. And if I had a child now, I would do things completely differently. But yeah, it's just trying, like he's not confident to like go out and socialize and like maybe find a job. He might be frightened, he might do something wrong. So I don't know now, he's at that age. How can I now maybe give him support through this? Because he is very reliant on myself, my mother and my grandmother.
Sure. If he's interested to learn these teachings, he's fully able to do that at 19 years old, where he's not at an age where you can really influence it. Like with my son at age 6, he was much more willing to learn from me than a 19-year-old would be, right? Because if they haven't learned their whole life and now trying to teach them, it's a lot more challenging because they're an adult. They need to be able to choose to bring these teachings into their life. So you can offer, a video or a book, or you can get them a book as a gift, have it sent to him and these kinds of things, but it's ultimately his choice of whether he chooses to learn. Just like my son, it was his choice, but he was much more willing to choose to learn them at age 6 than someone who's maybe gone through this period of time of 19 years not learning. The likelihood of them learning changes as they get older. So he's going to need to choose to learn them. So you're going to need to be able to find a way to recommend it to him and see if he's willing to learn. And then you're going to need to be unattached to whether he chooses to learn or not. And just understand that if he chooses not to learn these teachings, that's his choice. And he's just going to continue to have difficulties and struggles. And then the best thing you can do is just be a role model, that you learn these teachings more and more. That's what's going to help him to then be able to learn them, because he'll learn them through interacting with you. And one of the things you mentioned about this is a common thing, not just for young mothers or fathers, but just people in general. They sometimes beat themselves up for wisdom that they didn't have in the past, and they feel guilty and shameful that they didn't know certain things in the past. This is the mind's craving, right? That the mind is like craving to have had wisdom in the past that they now have today. So you need to be able to understand the reason why you have certain wisdom today is because you experienced those challenging times. And now when you worked through those, you cultivated wisdom in the process. And today you have wisdom differently than you did however many years ago. And it would be unwise for you to crave or beat yourself up for wisdom you didn't have 10 years ago or 20 years ago. So sure, all of us, had we have learned these teachings when we were 6 years old, like my son, we would have had a very different life growing up. But that's not what we experienced. That wasn't our decisions to do that. That's not what our decisions led to. Now you're learning these teachings at this age, but it's important not to beat yourself up for wisdom that you didn't have in the past. You made whatever decisions you made in the past, and then it's resulted in whatever it is that you're experiencing today, and now you're working on improving things today. And it's important not to beat yourself up for wisdom you didn't have yesterday. Mm-hmm.
Because he doesn't really experience anger. He is quite calm. Mm. Like if he asks for something and he can't, like I say, I haven't got that, sorry, I can't give you that. Mm-hmm. He doesn't, get angry. He's okay, that's fine. Yeah. So I think he's a good person, but I feel like maybe he needs more encouragement. But he's actually coming to Thailand in 2-3 weeks, and he will stay here for 2-3 months, so I can say, I'm going here, would you like to come with me? And we will see if he comes or not.
Yeah, that'd be perfect.
It's his choice. Can bring him along, and it's up to him.
With you guys living separate like this, it actually helps his mind to not be attached to you. I'm sure there's a certain level of attachment between you guys, but it's most likely less than if you guys were living together. And that doesn't mean that you shouldn't live together. It just is a beneficial aspect of having lived separately, that there's not as much attachment there. And there's things you can do that I taught yesterday, which is how to eliminate attachment to those who are closest to us, that I suggest you learn that, because there's obviously attachment to your son. And in order to be able to help these things and teach a child, you're going to need to eliminate attachment to him first. So that's why I taught that class yesterday before we got to this point. Because
if I don't give it sometimes, then my mum will. because he's living with my mum and my gran at the moment. So if he calls me, oh, mum, have you got this? I say, oh, I can't, I haven't. I've just paid for your flight over. I can't give you money. Then my mum will end up doing it anyway, which I just say to her, stop doing it, because like, how is he ever going to find a reason to go out and want to work for himself if you were just going to give him all the time? You got to say no sometimes for him to get the motivation to go and do it for himself.
Yeah, this is important. When my son got his mobile phone at age 11, I told him that I was going to pay his first 3 months, but then after that, he was going to need to pay it himself. And at that time, he was editing podcasts for me, and I was giving him some money for each podcast that he was editing. So he had more than enough money to be able to pay for his mobile phone bill. So he knew Dad was going to get him started, because I bought the phone and then I paid for the first 3 months. But then after that, he was on his own. And it went fine for about a year, but then he stopped doing the work to be able to make the money. So his phone got cut off. Me and my wife, we didn't pay his phone bill, and it's been cut off now for 2 months. And that's his results of his decisions. Where now yesterday he decided he's going to start editing the podcast again, because now he would like to get money, but he needed to go through that 2 months of not having a mobile phone service so that it would build his motivation to be able to see that, hey, when I don't do things, I don't get things. And then there's that party that they're having at the school that's coming up next month. And he told me that he was going to pay for it himself, because there's a fee to go to this party, like 399 baht. And he said, Dad, I'll pay for that myself. I was like, oh, perfect. So you would like to build it in very early in life like this, that they're paying for their own things. And if they're not willing to work to be able to pay for those things, then they don't get them, because they're going to learn that later in life. So the earlier that they learn it, the better.
I moved out when I was 16, when I had my son. So I had to do everything myself and start with nothing. And then when he was like 4 or 5, that's when he was in full-time education. That's when I decided, well, I want a better life than what I had. So then I did go to university, and because I like to travel, I wanted to do nice things with him, things which I couldn't do when I was younger. So that motivated me to want to do it for myself then, because no one ever did it for me. So, but I think with him, he's a bit more spoiled, to be honest. So I was trying to.
Yeah, sometimes when we don't have things as we're growing up, and we know what that struggle was like, when we have children, we try to create an environment where they don't have to experience that same struggle that we had. But we need to be able to understand as parents that the reason why you have the work ethic that you have is because you did experience that struggle. And if you remove that struggle from your child, he's not going to build that work ethic. So it's important to be able to do that. I had a student not too long ago. He told me he was having trouble with his 18, 19-year-old son. That his son carries his credit card, Dad's credit card. He carries Dad's credit card around. And he says that there's been charges popping up for $200 here and $300 there. And he said he's talked with his son multiple times about not doing this, but his son keeps doing it. He keeps using the card without asking his dad. And his dad said, what should I do here? I would like to take care of my son. I'd like to make sure he has the money that he needs. But he keeps doing this. What should I do? And I suggested to him to cancel the credit card and get rid of it. And of course, Dad had a lot of trouble with that. He was like struggling. But at the same time, he was talking about how his son doesn't want to work. He's not motivated to make his own money and these kinds of things. And I said, well, you're motivated to work, right? You do a lot of work, right? Like you have a strong work ethic. And he's like, oh, yeah, I do. And I said, well, did you carry around your parents' credit card when you were 18 or 19 years old? He said, no, I didn't have that. And I was like, oh, so that's what it was that built your work ethic, is that you didn't have that ability. So now what you've done is you've given your son that credit card, and now he's learned that I don't have to work because I'll just use Dad's credit card. And I said, if you remove that, now more and more he's going to learn that he needs to work on his own. So Dad got it. He understood. So sometimes we try to protect our children from those painful experiences that we have, but we don't realize that we're actually causing more harm by doing that, because you would like them to be able to struggle through that. So when my son's phone got turned off and the cell phone company canceled his service, I had a big old smile on my face. I was like, this is excellent. He's learning at age 12 that if you don't work and you don't pay your bills, your service is going to get cut off. This is so perfect. Yeah. So you would like to create those kinds of situations for them. Okay. Yeah. Okay. All right. So now let's move on. I've got some more to teach you here about this topic. Be prepared for detours. When you're teaching children and you're guiding them, you need to be able to understand this is a full-time job, right? There was a student one time that I was helping her with her children, and she has 2 children, and she was teaching them all these different things, right? And she had a situation where she was on her way to school with her children, or on her way to some social event or something, and her kids started fighting when they were putting on their shoes and putting on their jackets and stuff. And she asked me, what should she do? And I said, pause, sit down and talk and discuss things. And she's like, yeah, but then I'm going to be late for the event. And I was like, oh, well, right? Because the goal isn't to just show up on time. The goal is to show up peacefully and joyfully. And if you can't do that, then it's not the best thing to do. So take your time and be prepared for detours. You're going to have to call timeouts sometimes. There were times when I'd be on my way to playing mini golf with my son. He used to like to play mini golf, and we'd be on our way to play miniature golf, and he would be talking. He'd be like, man, I'm going to beat you. I'm going to do this, and I'm going to do this. I'm going to, walk you all up and down the course, and, I'm going to, basically trash you, right? He wasn't talking too aggressive, but his ego was coming out, right? And I was like, oh, really? If that's the case, I'm not interested in playing mini golf with you. I don't like to play games with people who have ego. And he's like, I'm going to beat you. You can't take it. I'm going to do this. I'm going to do that. I was like, yeah, we're going to go back home. I'm going to just take a U-turn and I'm going to go back home. I'm not interested in playing with you today. Right. So in that situation, we had to take a detour because his mind was having ego. And I was interested to show him that when you have ego, people aren't going to be interested in playing with you. So if I was attached to the game and I really wanted to play the game and I was so excited to go play the game, we would have just went and played the game and he wouldn't have learned that lesson, right? So you're going to need to take detours when you're teaching your children. You're going to need to be able to be willing to take a U-turn and not go play mini golf and understand that that's more important for them to not play mini golf than go play mini golf. So be willing to take detours. If you're driving in the car and there's something going on and you need to pull over to the side for 10, 15, 20 minutes and have a conversation in order to be able to then continue in your journey, do that, right? Because the goal isn't to just show up somewhere on time. The goal is to show up peacefully and joyfully, that everybody has wisdom to be able to understand how to make wise decisions. And if the children are festering or they're making unwise decisions, you're going to need to be willing to take a detour. Always be supportive and encouraging when you're teaching your children. If you can accentuate the positive, the things that they're actually doing wisely, you won't actually have to talk about too many things that they're doing unwisely. So with children, it's important, probably a good 98% of the time, be explaining to them the things that they're doing wisely, right? So if my son, at one time, he was having difficulties with his mom, talking aggressive and bitter with his mom, and I was helping him with this. And every single time he talked bitter and harsh and hostile with his mom, I didn't just jump in and tell him this, but when he talked wisely to his mom, I told him that. So when he had conversations with his mom and it went really well, I'd be like, wow, that's really great the way you did with mom right there. You practiced right speech. That was really wonderful. Hey, by the way, are you interested in some ice cream? Because now that I saw that you talked really well with mom, we should probably go get some ice cream. This is a good time to go celebrate, right? So I would do that. I would encourage his positive behavior. And then he was more and more likely to do that. And then occasionally when we needed to talk about the things that he was struggling with, he was more open to talking about those things because he knew that dad would only talk to him about those things if they were really important. So I call this accentuating the positive. You would like to be encouraging and supporting when you're talking with your children. And make sure that you separate the decisions that they're making from them as a person. I would never say you are mean or you are unkind or you are not friendly. I would never say that. I would say things like, this decision that you're making over here, this is not wise, or this is really hateful, this decision that you're making. So we talked about his decisions. I never talked about him as a person. This will help with the confidence that instead of telling someone that they're a bad person or you have done this wrong or something like that, you talk about the decisions that, hey, this decision you're making over here, I think you can make a better decision there. I have confidence in you that you can make a better decision than that, right? So this is a way to stay supportive and encouraging, that you don't degrade them as a person. You just talk about their decisions of whether they're wise or unwise, and now you help them to cultivate the wisdom of how to make wiser and wiser decisions. It's important that you eliminate your anger and aggressiveness, that you're not shouting, you're not yelling and hollering. If you ever get to a point where that's what you're doing, you need to restrain your mind from that and walk away. Anytime you're trying to teach, you need to be calm and stable and steady. If you're trying to teach this person to eliminate their anger and hostility, you would be very unwise to function through anger and hostility, because it's only going to produce unwholesome results for you. Understand the difference between firm speech and harsh speech. Because remember, the Buddha teaches you as part of the Eightfold Path that it's unwise to use harsh speech. Harsh speech is your tone, your tempo, and your word choice. You can be aggressive and harsh and hostile and bitter. And as you're doing that, it's going to produce unwholesome results for you. But there are situations with children, and only children, that you might need to speak firmly with them. And here's the difference. So if me and my son were talking about lying, I might have actually guided him 4, 5, 6, 8, 10 different times about lying and helping him to understand how unwise it is to lie. And we were talking about this and we were discussing it, right? So then after he started to continue to lie, sometimes I would firm up my speech. I would say, Bailan, you're lying. This is unwise. You need to stop doing this. This is going to produce nothing but unwholesome results for you. I really encourage you to stop lying. Right? So they're a little bit firm speech. So he understood how important it was. Where someone might be harsh. Someone might, you need to stop lying. You da 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 da. Right? That's harsh. You're not interested in doing that. But you can firm up your speech a little bit. After you've guided them and you've helped them and you've tried to teach them, you might just firm it up a little bit, paying attention to your tone and your tempo. Your word choice might be exactly the same, right? Where when I'm guiding him, I might say, Bailan, this lying is unwise. You shouldn't be lying because it's going to produce all kinds of unwholesome results for you. But now, after I've done that 6, 8, 10 times and it's not working, now I might firm that up. Bailan, you really need to stop lying. This is going to only produce unwholesome results for you. This is something that you really need to consider. Right? Just kind of firming up the tone and the tempo a little bit. So this is firm speech. And the Buddha teaches this, that you can have this firm speech, but you need to make sure there's not any anger or hostility behind it, because if you have anger and hostility, it's going to turn into harsh speech. So you need to make sure your mind doesn't have any anger and hostility, and you're just paying attention to the firmness of your speech, the tone and the tempo. It's important to impart wisdom and understand that that's your goal. Your goal isn't to force this person to do anything. Your goal is to help them become an independent decision maker, and you're going to need to be able to guide them in doing that. You have a vested interest in your child having wisdom, because as you age, it's your children that are going to be taking care of you. They're going to be making decisions about your health and your wellness. your medical procedures, where you're going to be living, these kinds of things, they're most likely going to be making these decisions for you. So you have a vested interest in this person being really wise, right? You will see this here in Thailand. Parents will invest all kinds of effort and energy and money to educate their children because they know their children are the ones that are going to be making decisions for them when they age. And you would like that being to be as smart as possible, right? So that when you age, they're making wise decisions for you. If you're forcing and controlling them as a parent to do things a certain way, when you age, they're going to be doing the same things to you. So if your child is eating and you force them to eat food, now as you age and you're not interested in eating food, they're going to try to force you to eat food too. They're going to do exactly the same things that you did as a child with them. They're going to do exactly those same things with you when you age. This is your karma. So you would like them to have wisdom so that then they can make wiser and wiser decisions for you. It's important to understand that you're going to need to have these little mini lessons and repeat these lessons multiple times. Most of the times when I was teaching my son, it was like 30 seconds here, 1 minute there, 2 minutes there. There are these little mini lessons. So he might have learned about impermanence, right? And then when we were driving down the road, he sees a dead dog on the side of the street. And he's like, "Dad, what is that?" I was like, "I don't know. You tell me, what is that? Why do beings die?" And he's like, "Oh, because they're born. This is impermanence, that they have to die." And I was like, "Yep, that's right." And then we just keep driving, right? So there's these little 30-second little lessons here or there, right? So this is the best way to teach a child, is through fun and games and activities, but also these little mini lessons, because they can't sit down and listen to a 2-hour talk. It's not possible. Use the Eightfold Path as your guide, right? This is the same thing that you need to learn, and you can use the Eightfold Path as your guide. So when I noticed that my son was talking in unwise ways to his mom, I taught him right speech, just like I teach you guys. I taught him right speech. And then we would actually have fun with it. There'd be times where I'd walk into the room and he was talking bitter and harsh and hostile with his mom. And I would say, "Hey guys, time out." And I would smile and be like, "Hey, time out. Let's calm down for a little bit. Bailan, I was noticing your speech wasn't quite using the 5 factors of well-spoken speech. Would you agree?" And he's like, "Yeah, I wasn't using the 5 factors of well-spoken speech." And I was like, "All right, well, let's talk about them. Which ones were you using and which ones were you not using?" And he would walk through them, right? Speaking at the proper time, what you say is true, gentle, beneficial, with a mind of loving kindness. And sometimes he couldn't quite see, right? So I would kind of help him. I'd be like, "Were you speaking at the right time?" He's like, "Yeah." I was like, "Was it true?" "Yeah." And I was like, "What about gentle? Was it gentle?" He's like, "No, it wasn't gentle." And I was like, "What about beneficial?" He's like, "No, it wasn't beneficial." I was like, "Was it with a mind of loving kindness?" And then I might start tickling him or something like that. He's like, "No, it wasn't with a mind of loving kindness. I was angry." And I was like, okay. Well, how about we try to do this again? Right? And then mom would kind of get into it sometimes, and she'd be like, kind of like making it and like, "Okay, I'm waiting for you. Let me hear this right speech." So Bailan would then start trying to talk a little bit, and he might have improved by 50% or 80%, but it wasn't quite hitting the target, right? So he would say the whole thing, and I'd be like, "All right, one more time. Little bit more gentle, just a little bit more sweet. Let's just hear that sweetness come through a little bit more." So then he would try it a third time, and he would go through it. So you can do these kinds of things where you're using the Eightfold Path as a guide, but you're also having fun with it, right? You're not yelling at them. You're not hollering at them. You're not forcing them to do it. You're just having fun with it, right? So once they learn it, you can then have fun with it and use the Eightfold Path as a guide. Also, you're going to need to teach your child other things besides the Eightfold Path, right? It's not only the Eightfold Path that they need in order to survive in this world. They're going to need to learn how to cook and clean and iron clothes and things like this, grocery shopping and stuff like that. They're going to need to learn all these different things. I still remember At age 9, my mom having me at the ironing board with the iron and showing me how to iron a shirt properly. She was teaching me all the different pieces of the shirt, the yoke of the shirt, the sleeves, and the ordering and the sequencing of how to iron. I still remember that. She said, here, I iron your clothes for you typically, but I'm not going to be around all the time, and you're not necessarily going to have a wife all the time to be able to iron for you. You're going to need to know how to iron yourself. And she sat there and she taught me how to iron, right? So you're going to need these kinds of skills yourself, but you're going to need to impart those with your children. So understand that, yes, they need to know the Eightfold Path, but they need to know all these other life skills too. Send them into the grocery store, age 12, age 13. You maybe have a cart. They have a cart too. And they're learning how to grocery shop, right? Learning how to compare prices from one product to the other. This is all very good learning for them, okay? It's important not to punish a child. Sometimes this is what we're taught, that maybe we grew up having punishments, and now we might think that that's the way to teach a child. But when you're punishing your child, it's typically coming from anger and hostility and bitterness, and you haven't really thought out what you're actually really trying to do here. You're just trying to cause pain. It might be coming from your ill will. Instead, if you're going to do these kinds of things, you need to be able to guide them to learn and grow and develop. There are situations where my son has video games that are taken, or he's not able to use his mobile phone or his computer, but these are decisions that he actually makes. So for example, with the lying, we might have sat down and talked about the lying 3, 4, 5, 6 different times. Make sure that he understands that it's unwise for him to lie, and he understands it fully. And now after he understands it, I'll say, this is like the 6th time we've had to talk about this. I think if you continue to lie, we're going to need to implement something to get your attention, because obviously you're not focusing on this enough. And he's like, what are you talking about, Dad? And I said, well, I see you spend a lot of time on video games. What do you think that if you lie again, that maybe you don't play video games for a while in order to be able to help you to focus more on not lying? He's like, all right, that sounds good. And I said, okay, well, if you lie again, how long do you think you should go without video games? And then he'll come up with the answer. He'll say 3 days. And I'm like, okay, that sounds reasonable. So we'll start with that, right? And then when he lies the next time, he already knows what the consequences are. He's come up with it himself. And he realizes that it's not a punishment. It's for him to get his mind together and gather his thoughts so that he understands not to lie. Right? So you're not interested in punishing them, but you might need to do these kinds of things in order for them to be able to get their attention. But where possible, you would like them to be able to come up with these things. And then at the same time, if they're attached to the video games, it's actually helping them to eliminate their craving to the video game too. Then you would like to reward good conduct. Where you see them making wise decisions, you would like to reward that. So there were times where we'd be in 7-Eleven and he'd be like, Dad, can I get some Doritos? And I'd be like, let me think for a moment. Let's see. You took out the trash this morning. You talked with your mom really nicely. That was good. You used right speech. Yeah, I can get you those Doritos. I would have got him the Doritos either way, right? You need to feed this kid. But if you can connect it to some kind of conduct that they're actually doing, and they can see that when they make wise decisions about their conduct, that there's these certain rewards that they're getting, then they're going to be more incented to do that. So sometimes my son says, hey, Dad, can you take me to the movies? And I'll be like, let me see. What grades do you have right now? Well, you've got A's in all of these classes, but this class you could probably do a little bit better in. I tell you what, how about if you get your grade up in that class and then I'll take you to go see that movie? He's like, all right, that sounds good, right? So you can reward good conduct this way, because you probably would have taken them to the movies anyway. You might as well get some benefit out of it, that it brings their conduct up. So you can do these kinds of things. When you're interacting with children, don't ever assume that you know the full story, right? Because you're going to hear things from them, but you don't know the full story. There were times when my son would come home at age 8 or 9 telling me something that's happening at school. And if I only would have listened to him, my goodness, things sound like the sky's falling at the school. But then I talk to the teacher, I talk to the other student involved, I might talk to a principal or something like that, and I hear more of the story, right? So never assume that you know the full story. You're going to need to talk with multiple people. And in some cases, it's just kids. It's just 2 or 3 or 4 kids that you're talking to, and you're piecing together the story from all these kids. Sometimes when people hear from their child and their child is experiencing painful feelings, they want to just run out the door based on what it is that they heard from their child and start making a bunch of decisions. You need to be able to understand that whatever you hear from your child, it's not the full story, and not necessarily because they're lying. It's just that their mind is incapable of fully remembering everything that happened and being able to explain it to you in the way that it actually happened. So there's oftentimes a lot of gaps in the story, and that's where you can fill that in by talking to other people. When you're teaching your child, location and position is really important. That if the parent is sitting on a sofa and the child is sitting on the floor, this is going to be really helpful for them to absorb the information, where it's not because you're above your child, right? Because we're all equal. It just puts the mind in a different position to be able to learn. So when we have really serious things that we need to talk about, my son sits on the floor in front of me. We don't sit on the sofa together, or we don't sit at the table together to eat. We do that, of course, in different parts of our life, but when it's something really important and really impactful and I really need to make sure that he's absorbing what it is that I have to share, he comes and sits over on the floor in front of me. And initially, when he first started doing this at age 6 and 7, I needed to ask him to come sit on the floor. But now he's at a point where probably by the age of 8 or so, he just understands that this is the way we do things. So there are times where he would come home from school and I had heard from his principal that something had happened. And I would say, hey, Bailan, I understand something pretty significant happened at school today. And he's like, yeah, I had a feeling you would know about that. And I was like, well, we need to talk about this. Can you come over here and talk? And he'll just come and sit by himself on the floor because he knows that this is an important time to learn. So the position that you're sitting in is really important. You can sit on the sofa with your child or do these kinds of things. You can kick back and relax and have a good time. But when it's something really impactful and you really need them to listen, if they sit on the floor in front of you, their mind will absorb what it is you have to say better. Remember that you can be friendly to your child, but you're not their friend. Friends and parents function very differently. They do things differently. And if you give up this parent role in their mind and you try to be their friend and they view you as a friend, they're going to treat you very differently. In some cultures, people are trying to be their child's best friend. Your child needs a best friend. They need friends, but their friends function very differently around them than their parents do. Parents have a completely different role. So I would encourage you to be friendly with your children, but don't ever put in your mind that you are their friend, because they need friends and they're going to do things differently with their friends than they do with you. If you give up this parent role that you have by trying to be their best friend, then you relinquish the ability to be able to help them in the ways that a parent would versus what a friend would do. Helping your child to understand true love, which we talked about yesterday. This is really helpful for them to understand what true love is, or unconditional love, love without attachment. There was a period of time where I realized my son didn't understand what love was. One time we were driving down the road. He was probably like 9 or 10 years old. And he said, I don't think mom loves me. And I said, oh, yeah, really? Of course I know his mom loves him, right? I say, yeah, well, really? Why is that? Well, she did this and she did that and she doesn't do this and she doesn't do that. I was like, that's interesting. I see. So because she didn't give you that money for that candy, that means she doesn't love you. Huh? Okay. Right. So we talked about it. And then finally we started talking about true love and what true love was. And I explained it to him. And then we started discussing. And I said, once he understood what true love is, I said, and he understood that it was a mental state, and the actions that someone does comes from that mental state. I asked him, I said, what kinds of things would someone who loves you actually do? And he's like, I don't know. What would they actually do? And I said, well, would they cook you food? He's like, yeah, they would cook me food. I was like, well, would they wash your clothes? And he's like, yeah, they would probably do that. So I just started giving all these examples, right? And I was like, that's interesting. Your mom actually does all those things. So based on your definition, are you sharing with me that you think your mom loves you? And he's like, yeah, I guess she does, right? So he came to that conclusion himself. I just guided him to be able to understand what is true love and the type of actions that somebody does if they love you. And then he put it together and he was able to see that his mom loves him. I didn't just say, of course your mom loves you. Like, oh, what are you, crazy? Right? I didn't say that, right? I had to help him to be able to gain the wisdom of what is love and what the actions are that someone would do if they loved you. And then he was able to see the truth for himself. So making sure your child understands true love is important. Communication of love is, yes, through speech, but it's through actions. That's what really communicates the love, right? You can tell your child you love them all day long, but if your actions don't show that's not going to be able to help them to understand what is love. And loving someone doesn't mean you give them everything that they want, right? That there's going to be situations where you don't give them the things that they need or the things that they want. And this can be an act of love. So communication of love is through actions, not only through speech. It's important to tell your child that you love them, but then in certain situations, be sure that your actions are following that. Loving all children equally is important. If you have multiple children, if you treat one child one way and another child another way, it's going to produce jealousy. And now you're going to have to deal with that. So treating all your children equally is the same. Spending quality time with your children versus quantity of time. The quantity of time you spend with someone isn't an indication of really anything at all. It's the quality of time. You might spend very minimal time with certain people, but it's important to spend quality time with individuals, that you spend that quality time having certain conversations, going to do things with each other, having certain experiences with each other. If you have shared custody with a child, like say you have an ex-partner and now they go see that ex-partner for a period of time, understand that when they go spend time with that partner, they're probably not going to be learning and practicing these teachings in the same way that they are when they're with you. So they're going to essentially regress while they're away. So if you're training them and you're teaching them and you're guiding them on this path and they go spend time with mom or dad for 2 weeks over the summer, when they come back, they're not going to be where they left off. Right? They're going to have regressed because things in that household probably go very differently than in your household. So just be patient of that and understanding of that. And you're going to just need to help them to get back to that point to where you were helping them. They can be influenced by other people. When they go to school, when they're around their friends, they can be influenced in ways that you would rather them not be influenced, but it is going to happen. So there was a period of time where I was really helping my son with ego and understanding not to have ego. And during the summer, when he was off from school, he was doing really well, not having ego. But then he went to school and he was around some boys that had a bunch of ego. And I kept noticing every time he would come home from school, he had all this ego in his mind. So one of the things I share with him, I said, just because you go to school and your friends have ego doesn't mean that you need to absorb that. Doesn't mean you need to have ego. You can understand that that's unwise and you can come home and still be humble and polite and respectful. So you can teach them these kinds of things to show them how their mind is being influenced by other people. So if you know that their mind is being influenced by other people, your goal is not to block them or stop them from spending time with those people, unless, of course, it's significantly harmful. But instead, you need to teach them how their mind is being influenced by that so that then they can learn to control their mind and not be influenced by that in the future. I already talked about this one, excitement versus enjoyment, ensuring that you're not just having these excited experiences. You can learn how to enjoy something without conditional excitement. That's what your mind needs to do. That's why acquiring the wisdom is so important, where you can enjoy something, but there's not all this excitement. So like I've taken my son to Disney World and I took him to Legoland because he's really was interested in Legoland, but there wasn't all this excitement like, yeah, we're at Legoland. Yay, we're at Disney World. Oh my gosh, this is so amazing. No, we just went there and enjoyed it. We had a good time. We had a really fun time, but there wasn't all this, hoopla, this big excitement. Because then if you allow those conditioned feelings, when it's time to leave, the mind is like really sad and frustrated. Now you have to leave Disney World. You have to leave Legoland. Because if you allow that big excitement to come in, then when it's time to leave, the mind's not getting what it wants. And now it's going to be sad or frustrated. So you need to learn how to go to a certain situation, enjoy it. And then when it's over, and you move on to the next thing. praise and reward is really helpful. Just like an animal's mind, the unenlightened mind functions very much like an animal. It will function through this praise and reward, where you can actually give praise and reward for good conduct. And sometimes the praise and reward is just a rub on top of the head or a hug or a kiss or something like that. Sure, it can be a candy bar or a bag of chips or going to the movies like we were talking about earlier. But sometimes it can just be a hug or a rub on the head like, hey, good job, buddy. That was really wonderful the way you just handled that. I really appreciate the way you just took care of that, right? So that can be a praise and reward as well. Okay, so any questions on any of this? Yes. Joycelyn. What a great name. It fits right in with the teachings of the Buddha.
Okay, so I did not have the wisdom of the teachings when I was raising my child, but I was very concerned about the environment and influences around her. And so for the first 5 years, I did not send her into school, formal school. And I did homeschooling. And so my question is, if I were going to do this again, and I wanted to model and teach the teachings of the Buddha, is it wise to keep them when they're very young out of, the greater social environment to really get that in there? Or do you just throw them in there and then just deal with the stuff as it comes?
Each parent's going to make different decisions about that based on what they're encountering and the variables involved. For me, when I lived in the USA, I didn't send him to school. We were there until he was 2.5 years old. People were surprised I didn't send him to preschool, but because of what I understood of the schools in the USA, I wasn't interested in sending him to those. So when he got here to Thailand, then he started going to school, and he went to school here up until grade 6. He went to grade 6. And I'm glad that we did it that way, because he was able to interact and socialize with a lot of the children. And now, even though he homeschools now, he's got a lot of friends and he knows how to make friends. So that's what we chose based on the situation that we were encountering. But everybody is a little bit different. Here in Thailand, they have one type of social environment for the children. In other countries, they have other environments. So each parent's going to need to make that decision. There isn't just one right decision, so to speak, because that would be a permanent decision, right? And there's no such thing as that. But you need to be able to look at it. But at least if you're learning and practicing the things that I just taught, you can be doing that no matter what, whether they're homeschooled or whether they're in school. You can be teaching them along the way. So I was teaching them along the way. Yeah, you're welcome.
Teacher, can I ask you questions not about topic today, about enlightenment?
Sure.
Like, I'm maybe I'm misunderstanding something, or maybe you can give me a way I can find much more deeply about that. But like enlightenment, I realize that we have like 4 levels, right? Like, and I just I would like understand where I'm going, like how I will understand this. That's level 1 or it's level 2, and what I will feel about that. How can you explain a little bit more about that? How it works?
Is your question, how will you know that you're in each of these 4 stages?
Yes, and also like what difference between the 4 stages?
Sure. So the first stage, it's referred to as stream entry, or the first stage of enlightenment. And having gotten to that stage of enlightenment, you will have eliminated the first 3 fetters: personal existence view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. And you will know exactly what those fetters are. You will know what the symptoms of them are. You will know how to eliminate them. And you know that your mind has actually eliminated them. Then you will also have accomplishment in view, accomplishment in generosity. You will understand the 5 aggregates, the 6 sense bases, the dependent origination. These are all teachings that you will have fully understood and been practicing. And by the time you get to that first stage of enlightenment, you will have significantly diminished your discontentedness. Whatever you were once experiencing when you were off the path to enlightenment, it's going to be a mere fraction. You're going to still be getting discontent, but it's going to be a mere fraction of what it once was when you were off the path to enlightenment. The second stage of enlightenment, you will have already eliminated the first 3 fetters: personal existence, view, doubt, and wrong behavior and observances. But you will have thinned out number 4 and 5, which is sensual desire and ill will. And at this point, your discontentedness has shrunk even more, where you're experiencing discontentedness, but it's not as significant as it once was. By the time you get to the third stage of enlightenment, you will have eliminated the 5 lower fetters: personal existence, view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, sensual desire, and ill will. And at this point, you're only going to be getting discontent about once every 3 months, once every 6 months. And when it's happening, not only is it infrequent that you're getting discontent, but it's very insignificant. It's probably lasting about 30 seconds, maybe a minute. And it's not even outwardly discontent. It's just inwardly discontent, just like a little bit of ickiness and uncomfortableness in the mind. There's no anger. By the time you get to the third stage of enlightenment, it's just like a little bit of ickiness in the mind. So you'll know that you're in that third stage of enlightenment because your discontentedness will almost be non-existent at that point. And that's where you need to be really attentive, because the mind can become complacent in that period of time because it's so infrequent that you're getting discontent. By the time you get to the fourth stage, where the mind's actually enlightened, you will have eliminated all the 10 fetters. So not only personal existence, view, doubt, wrong behavior and observances, sensual desire and ill will, but desire for form, desire for formless, conceit, restlessness, and ignorance or unknowing of true reality. And at this point, it will have been 1 year, 2 years, 3 years. There's no discontentedness whatsoever. The mind doesn't even have the slightest ickiness. It's just bright and cheerful and uplifted. All those benefits that you always hear me talk about, you'll be experiencing those, but there's others too. You won't be tired. You won't be exhausted. You'll be able to see that you have sustainable energy all day long. Your life will be completely at peace. You'll be living the ideal life. There's nothing about your life that you would change. There's still things that you're doing that is enhancing your life, but you'll be living at the place that you feel like this is the best place for me to live. You will be doing the job or occupation that you know that, wow, this is like the best job. I wouldn't even be interested in changing what it is that I'm doing. Your friends and family, the people around you that you spend time with on a day-to-day basis, wonderful relationships, harmonious relationships. You're living the ideal life at this point by the time you get to enlightenment. There's nothing that you would change, but you're completely comfortable with change by that point. No discontentedness at all.
So I understand, right? Like that it's like a process, like it's going like up and down, right? And it's sometimes it can happen like in roll. Sometimes it can happen like when you come back, like when you like got some success and after you come back.
Oh,
it
so
can happen in how it's in row.
Once you get to the first stage of enlightenment, there's no regression. Your mind won't regress backwards. It's only forward progress from that point forward. When your mind's in the jhanas and prior to the jhanas, if you became complacent, your mind would regress backwards. But if you get to the first stage of enlightenment, you won't have a regression in the quality of your mind. It'll only be forward progress from there.
Because sometimes I like work a little bit and I'm like feel like like I'm totally like 0 point, like, but sometimes I'm going down.
Yeah, that's because your mind's not in the first stage of enlightenment yet. So an individual who's not in the first stage, they could maybe spend 3 months or so building up their practice, but then they can become complacent and their mind will regress backwards. And then they might build it up again over here, and then they'll slide back, right? This is pretty common for someone who's on the path if they're not in the first stage of enlightenment yet.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Yeah, in the volume 1, chapter 3, I explained the 4 stages of enlightenment, but in terms of the detail that I just gave you, because she was asking a more detailed question, that's what I give in the classes. So in the books, I give you a certain amount of detail, but then when you guys ask questions, we go deeper into it. Okay, so let me just see if we have anything online here. I don't see any questions online. So it's just a few minutes after 11. So this talk sometimes goes longer, sometimes goes up to lunch, but today it didn't go up to lunch. So what we could do is do like we did on Tuesday, where we take a little bit of a break here, and then we come back, and the topic that I was planning to talk this afternoon, we could talk about it now, and then we'd probably be done by 12 o'clock. And basically you'd have the whole rest of the day to yourself. Does that sound good? Yeah, I see you shaking your head. And everybody good with that? Yeah. Okay, perfect. So why don't we take like a 15-20 minute break? That'll take us up to like 15 minutes will take us up to 11:20, and then we'll come back, and I'm going to teach you guys this next topic. The next topic is choosing wholesome friends and a life partner. I'm going to teach you how to do this without conceit, without judgment, where you're not looking down on people, because who you have around you is going to impact you and is going to produce certain results. So enjoy your break, and I'll see you guys back in about 15 minutes. Okay.